My name is Jim, and we're going to be building some shelves today on
Kilimanjaro.
I was realizing the other day that I really need some more shelves for my storage area on the other side of the basement here. I've got a lot of stuff that's just piled on top of each other. It makes it really hard to get to the stuff on the bottom, so I figured I could spend a couple bucks and make some shelves for it, make my life a little easier. IKEA makes some nice shelves that are pretty similar to what I'm going to be making here. It's kind of where I got the design. It's just some bare wood with just a couple different pieces of shelves on top of it. They've gotten a little expensive at IKEA. I remember them being a lot cheaper, as things happen to do. So I decided I was just going to build some myself here. So we're going to use some 2x4 material here. For the legs, I'm going to be ripping them down the length, so they'll be a little bit less than an inch thick and about 3 inches wide. For the supports of the shelves themselves, I'll be ripping them the other way, so they'll be about 1.5 inches by 1.5 inches square. And then for the slats that actually make up the shelves themselves, we'll be ripping them both ways, so they'll be a little bit thin on each side. That should be plenty strong enough. The only issue here is that the 2x4s that you can get at Lowe's or Home Depot, they can be pretty crummy. These aren't too bad, but some of them have some pretty bad knots and spots. So I'm going to have to make sure I work around those, don't have any of those in kind of critical spots. If you can't find any 2x4s that are in pretty good shape, that are pretty free of knots, sometimes if you look at 2x6s or 2x8s or something like that, they can be a lot better quality. And they also do have 2x2s that will tend to not have any knots in really bad spots on those as well. So the 2x2s are a lot more expensive. They cost about the same as the 2x4s, so it's kind of silly to get those unless you really can't get decent quality 2x4s. The 2x6s and 2x8s are a little bit more expensive, but they're not that bad. You just have to do a little bit extra ripping. So the first thing we're going to do is rip these down to length. These shelves are going to be about 5 feet tall. So we'll rip 2 of these down to length and then, or cross cut them down to length and then rip them down the middle. I'm going to cut the ends off here to make the legs. I want to cut them at 66 inches long. That will give me 30 inches for the rails. And I wanted to do 66 inches, a little over 5 feet, so that'll be a good height. 30 inches is about the width I need, so it'll work out really well for that. So let me mark that here. And on this other one, now I could do this over on the miter saw, but I'm going to use my little M12 cordless saw instead. It's actually a lot easier to just move this around rather than move the miter saw and get these boards and support both ends of them. So we'll just do it right here. Now for the rails, I'm going to need 3 18-inch long pieces. The 18-inch will be the depth of the shelf. If I make 3 sections here and then I'll rip them down lengthwise like that, that'll give me all the rails I need to support the shelves. So I'll measure that out. Cut that. Lastly, to make the shelves themselves, the part that will actually support the material, I'm going to make a bunch of these 30 inches long, and that'll be the kind of slats that go across the shelf. So mark this to 30 and then cut these down. This is kind of the crummiest 2x4 I had, so I'm going to save this for the slats for the shelves. With the number of slats there are, it shouldn't really matter if there's some splits or anything in here. Because the blade on the table saw can't go up high enough to rip a 2x4 down in one pass, we're going to do it on the bandsaw here. That way I can make it one shot. So let me turn my dust collector on and we'll rip these boards down. We're going to set this to a little bit less than 1.5 inches to rip these rails down to size. There we go. Let me turn my dust collection on and we'll rip these rails down. We're going to set the table saw to be a little bit less than 3/4 of an inch here, because we have to account for the blade width. So we want to be about a 1/16 less than 3/4 of an inch, because my blade is about 1/8 inch big. Lock that down. We're good to go. Now we've got to rip the shelf slats down. This board has a couple big notches in it here, so we're not going to be able to get too many out of here. It's also got a split, so I'm not sure how well this one will go, but we got a lot to do, so it shouldn't be a problem. I'm going to round over the sharp edges here that are left by the table saw real quick. I'm just going to use my little 12-volt router here with, I think it's a 3/16 inch round over bit in here. I'm ready to start assembling the shelves here. I've got a couple dogs in the bench here just so I can bank this up against here, and then I can eyeball this back part here, make sure everything is all nice and square, and I've got my square over here to check. I'm going to use staples to put this all together here. I don't really like using staples. They're a pain if you ever want to take it apart, but for something this cheap and that I'm putting together this quickly, staples will be just fine for that. So let's get to work. I've got a little spacer here to make them spaced out properly, and I've got a whole pile here, and we'll just go through this. So I chose that spacing specifically so the bearing on the bottom of my router will fit in between the slats here, so now I can go over and round this in. That'll mean that when I slide something over it, it won't get caught and make it just a little bit nicer. I'm going to lay out some holes for some screws and then pre-drill them here. I've got a nice little bit here that has a nice countersink on it, and that'll go straight through here. And then I'm not going to bother with pre-drilling on the rails themselves because it's going to the end grain, it shouldn't be a problem. So you can see that some of these 2x4s have quite a bit of bend in them. That did cause me some problems when I was ripping them down. So if you're going this route, you might want to buy the 1x4s already there instead of having to rip them down. It'll be a little more expensive, but then you won't have to deal with that sort of thing if you can find some good ones. So let's mark out some lines and we'll get it going with these holes. Now comes the tricky part, trying to assemble this whole thing. So I've got the 3 shelves stacked up. There's another one over that way you can't see. This center one here is clamped, so it won't actually fall over, although it is a little floppy still. So I'm going to put the rails on top of it and hopefully screw it down without the whole thing going this way or this way on me. So wish me luck here. Last thing is I need to prevent this from racking, so going like this here. So there's none of the screws or anything is really going to hold in that direction, so we want to put some cross bracing across. Now if you use the IKEA one, it's got a nice little metal brace. If you've got an IKEA near you, you might want to go pick those up. They're only like $5, so that might be the easiest thing. I'm just going to use these 2 kind of thin strips of wood. They don't need to do a whole lot. They're really just going to be in tension, so anything thin is going to be fine. However, I want to be careful though not to use screws, particularly countersunk screws on the end, because it'll split the wood and it'll just pull right out the end. So I'm just going to use some staples. If you do this, if you have some panhead screws, that'll work just fine. Just don't use countersunk screws on this. So I'll put this like this, and the other one like that. We'll just staple it down. Shelves are all done now. Only cost me about $15. Cost a couple 2x4s. Took about an hour and a half, so not a lot of time commitment on that either. I'm not going to bother putting any finish on these. They're just going to sit in my basement. Nobody's ever going to see them. They don't need any finish on them. The wood will be just fine as it is. These cross braces on the back really help with the rigidity of it, make it a lot sturdier. And I'm really glad that I put all the roundovers on it. It makes it feel a lot nicer. It'll make putting things on here a lot easier. The boxes or whatever I put on here won't get caught as I slide them back. So that's really nice. If you like this video, if you want to build one of these, give it a thumbs up, and thanks for watching.